I know what you're thinking. I must be some kind of sicko, right? A monster, and maybe I am. But let me tell you something. People don't just become this way for no reason. We don't just wake up one day and decide we're going to start killing for money. It's a slow burn, a gradual build-up from the shit life throws at you until one day, you look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. I'm no hero. I don't save people. I don't stop bad guys because it's the right thing to do. I'm just a man, no, more like a machine now, who found a niche in this fucked up world. The dark web. You'd be amazed at what people are willing to pay for over there. Human lives, just another transaction. It all started 2 years ago. I'd just gotten laid off from a job I hated anyway. Cubicle, dead end, boring as hell. I was drinking more than I should have been, gambling on bullshit, and burning through the small severance check they handed me like it was nothing. I was desperate for cash, drowning in debts, and my girlfriend had just left me. She said I was dangerous, that I was becoming someone she didn't recognize anymore. Maybe she saw it before I did. Late one night, I stumbled across a forum buried deep in the corners of the web. It wasn't the normal bullshit, porn or drugs. This was darker, real dark. I knew about the whole dark web hitman rumors, but I never believed them. It sounded like urban legend crap, you know. But there it was, plain as day. A message board with bounties, real people, real lives, and a whole lot of money being offered for their heads. I didn't jump right into it. No, at first I just lurked. I read post after post. People would put out contracts, sometimes with detailed reasons. Cheating spouses, business rivals, someone who had simply looked at them funny. But the most interesting ones were the anonymous jobs. You didn't know the client, didn't know the reason, just a name, an address, and a payout. A part of me was curious, sure, but I wasn't about to cross that line. Not yet. Then the eviction notice came. I was 2 months behind on rent, and my landlord wasn't exactly the understanding type. He didn't give a shit about my situation. I needed money fast. That's when I made the decision. The line I promised I'd never cross? Well, I leaped over it head first. I started small. The first guy, let's call him Mark, was just some low-level drug dealer who'd pissed off the wrong people. The bounty was $10,000. I figured it'd be easy. He lived alone, no family, no real connections. I followed him for days, learned his routine, what time he left his place, when he came back. I got obsessed with it, planning every single detail. It felt almost mechanical, like I was born to do it. I went to his apartment one night, pretending to be a customer. He didn't even blink when I asked to buy. I guess he thought he was safe. When he turned his back, that's when I struck. I still remember the sound his skull made when the hammer cracked it open. The blood, it sprayed everywhere, and at first I froze. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no clean kill, no one and done. He thrashed on the floor, twitching, trying to scream, but all that came out was this garbled, wet sound. It was disgusting, and yet I couldn't stop. I hit him again and again, until his face was unrecognizable, and the apartment walls were painted red. After that, I sat there in his blood for what felt like hours. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline still surging through me. I thought I'd feel something, guilt, fear, regret, but all I felt was calm, in control, alive. I didn't realize until later that the hammer wasn't even the worst part. No, the worst part was what happened after. I had to clean up the mess, and trust me, there's nothing more dehumanizing than wiping chunks of someone's brain off the floor like it's some kind of spilled drink. I bagged the body, made it look like a drug deal gone wrong. The cops wouldn't give a shit. They'd chalk it up as just another junkie who got what was coming to him. They never even looked into it. When I got my first payment, I couldn't believe how easy it had been. 10 grand wired into an untraceable account, just like that. I should have felt dirty, right? I should have been disgusted with myself. But I wasn't. I felt powerful, untouchable. I'd found my calling. That's how it all began. One job turned into 2, then 3. Each one got easier. The adrenaline rush started to fade, replaced by a cold efficiency. I started to enjoy the planning part more than the kill itself. Stalking them, learning their habits, figuring out the perfect moment to strike. It became a game, a twisted, fucked up game of cat and mouse. The targets were nobodies, really. Losers, criminals, people who'd pissed off the wrong people or seen something they weren't supposed to see. But the dark web doesn't care about morality. It's just supply and demand. If someone's willing to pay for a life, I'm willing to take it. I've done things that would turn your stomach. Things I don't talk about, even here. I'm not proud of them. I don't relish the pain I cause, but I don't shy away from it either. I guess that makes me a monster. But I've accepted it. Someone's got to do the dirty work, and I'm damn good at it. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you this, why I'd risk exposing myself. The truth is, I'm tired. Tired of living in the shadows. Tired of always looking over my shoulder, wondering when the hammer's going to come down on me. Because it will. I'm not naive enough to think I'll get away with this forever. I guess part of me wants to confess in a way, but not for forgiveness. No, I don't want that. I don't need it. I want people to know that monsters aren't born. We're made, molded by this fucked up world. And once you step into the darkness, there's no going back. So yeah, I'm a killer. I hunt people for money. I take lives because that's what I'm paid to do. And maybe one day someone will come for me. Maybe I'll end up on a bounty list, just another name and address for some other poor bastard to take out. Until then, I'll keep doing what I do best. I'm not sure when I crossed that invisible line where killing became just part of my life. It's not like I woke up one day and thought, well, time to murder someone for breakfast. It's more subtle than that. The life I used to have, friends, relationships, going out for beers after work, none of that exists anymore. And I don't miss it. I started taking jobs outside my comfort zone, pushing boundaries. After the first couple of hits, word got around. That's the thing about the dark web. It's not like the regular internet. There's no Yelp, no ratings, no 5-star reviews, just whispers in encrypted chats, anonymous referrals. I'd hear about a job in some obscure thread, follow the leads, and find myself hunting another target before I even realized what I was doing. But one job changed everything. I was browsing the usual forums, keeping an eye out for anything lucrative. That's when I saw it. An anonymous post with a bounty way higher than anything I'd seen before. $250,000 for one hit. I couldn't believe it. At first I thought it was a joke, maybe some new guy trying to bait a professional into a trap. But when I dug deeper, everything checked out. The target, a guy named Calvin Bishop. No details on why someone wanted him dead, but that didn't matter. I don't ask questions. I'm not in the business of ethics. I'm in the business of getting paid. The thing about Bishop that stood out was his profile. This guy wasn't some low-level scumbag or a throwaway drug dealer. He was rich, like mansion with a private security team kind of rich. And that made things complicated. He lived in a massive estate in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by guards and cameras. It was a fortress. Getting to him wasn't going to be easy, but $250K, I couldn't resist. I spent weeks planning, stalking him from afar, figuring out his routine. Bishop had a taste for the finer things, fancy dinners, high-end cars, expensive clothes. But despite his wealth, he was careful, paranoid even. His guards were no joke, and the security system, state-of-the-art. The kind of stuff you see in movies, where the walls are lined with infrared sensors and motion detectors. I couldn't just walk in with a hammer this time. I needed an in, and I found it through his wife. Mrs. Bishop, younger than him by at least 20 years, a classic trophy wife. She wasn't just some airhead though, she was sharp and lonely. I started showing up at places she frequented, cafes, high-end shopping malls, charity galas. I blended in, a ghost in the background waiting for my moment. I can't explain it, but there's something darkly thrilling about slipping into someone's life without them even noticing. You get close, closer than anyone else ever could. And when you finally strike, it's like they never saw you coming. I found out Mrs. Bishop liked to have drinks at this exclusive club downtown. I followed her there one night, made sure to bump into her, accidentally. It's easy to charm someone when they're vulnerable. A little attention, a couple of compliments, and people open up like you wouldn't believe. She told me about how Calvin was so distant lately, how he worked too much, how she missed the old days. I played the part, sympathetic, understanding. I wasn't there for her, of course, but it helped me get what I needed. An invite to their house. Once I had that, the rest was easy. I made sure I showed up when Bishop wasn't home, under the guise of keeping her company. She let me in, offered me a drink, and that's when I made my move. I disabled their security system, wiped the footage, and waited. The night Bishop came home was one of the longest nights of my life. I remember the way his footsteps echoed through the house when he walked in. He didn't see me at first. I was hiding in the shadows like I always do. I watched him. He looked normal. Just a guy coming home from work, exhausted, unbuttoning his suit jacket. I could have killed him right there, but I wanted something else. I wanted him to know why he was dying. I stepped out from the shadows, and when he saw me, his face went pale. I guess he'd been expecting something like this. Maybe not tonight, maybe not like this, but guys like him, they make enemies. He didn't even scream, didn't beg for his life. He just stood there, eyes wide, staring at me like I was some kind of phantom. I tied him to a chair in his fancy living room, right under the chandelier that probably cost more than my entire life. He didn't struggle. He just kept asking why. Why him? What had he done? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The fear in his eyes was enough. The thing about rich guys like Bishop, they think money will protect them. They think they're invincible behind their walls of cash and bodyguards. But they're just as human as the rest of us. They bleed the same. They die the same. I remember leaning in close, whispering in his ear, "You're here because someone wants you gone. That's it. Nothing personal." And then I did something I hadn't done before. I took my time. Usually, I'm efficient. Quick, clean. But this time, something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he still couldn't believe this was happening to him. Like he was too important, too special to die. I wanted to break that. I wanted him to feel every second. The first cut was shallow, just a nick across his cheek. He flinched, gasping as the blood dripped down his face. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that this wasn't going to be quick. He tried to reason with me, offered me money, more than the bounty, but I didn't care. I don't do this for the cash anymore. Not really. It's about control. About watching the life drain from their eyes, knowing I'm the one who's taking it. I dragged the knife down his arm, slowly, watching the skin split open like fabric. The blood pooled on the floor beneath him, and he whimpered. The smell of copper filled the air, thick and suffocating. I didn't stop. I kept cutting, carving patterns into his skin. It wasn't about killing him at that point. It was about making him suffer, about breaking him piece by piece. Eventually, he stopped struggling. His eyes glazed over, and he just gave up. I watched the light leave him, felt his pulse slow until it finally stopped. Afterward, I cleaned up like I always do, wiped down the surfaces, made sure there were no traces of me left. But something about that kill felt different. It wasn't just a job. It was something more, something primal. I didn't realize until later that Mrs. Bishop had been watching the whole time, hiding upstairs in the bedroom. She never said a word, never called for help. She just stood there, frozen in the doorway as I walked past her on my way out. I don't know why she didn't report me. Maybe she was too scared, maybe she didn't care. Or maybe, just maybe, she wanted him dead as much as I did. After the Bishop job, things changed for me. Not in some grand, epiphany-filled way, but something inside me just shifted. Killing Calvin Bishop wasn't just another hit. It was something darker, something more personal, even though it wasn't supposed to be. I didn't need to prolong his suffering, but I did. I wanted to. It was the first time I realized that the act itself was beginning to matter more than the payout. The dark web chatter after the job was immediate. Whispers spread like wildfire about how I'd taken down a target so high profile, so protected, without leaving a single trace. I became something of a myth. People referred to me only as the Reaper. But while my reputation grew, so did the risks. The contracts were getting more dangerous, and I could feel something looming over me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Then the next job came, and it was unlike any other.
This time, the message wasn't anonymous. It came from a user named BL4 Seek Widow, a name I'd seen tossed around in some of the most twisted corners of the web, the kind of name that made people disappear without a trace. The contract wasn't like the others either. There was no address, no routine to follow, no simple stakeout. Just a name and a few cryptic details. A man named Jared Kessler, location unknown. But the instructions were clear. Find him. And the bounty? $500,000. $500,000 to take out some guy I had never heard of. That's when I knew something was off. But the thing is, once you're in this business long enough, you learn that curiosity gets you killed. You follow the job, no questions asked. So, I dug. I hacked into old databases, surveillance systems, anything that would help me locate him. Jared Kessler wasn't just some rich asshole like Bishop. No, Kessler was a ghost. He had no digital footprint, no social media, no bank accounts, no records. Just a couple of blurry photos from a security camera in a subway station 5 years ago. It didn't make sense. People like that don't just vanish from the grid, unless they're running from something, or hiding from someone. It took me months to find a lead, a tiny thread in the vast web of nothing that Kessler had left behind. Eventually, I traced him to an old rundown neighborhood in a shithole town halfway across the country. A place where people mind their own business because they're too afraid to ask questions. I rented a cheap motel room a few blocks away and started watching. The house Kessler lived in was a dump, one of those places that looked like it should have been condemned years ago. Rusted metal fencing, overgrown yard, windows boarded up, classic crack den vibes. But I could tell from the movement inside that someone was definitely living there. At night, the lights would flicker on for just a few hours before plunging back into darkness. No visitors, no activity beyond the occasional late-night grocery run. The guy was a shut-in.
I watched him for weeks. Every day, the same routine. He'd leave the house, hoodie pulled low over his face, slip into the local convenience store, buy the same shit. Cigarettes, canned soup, nothing unusual. But something about him felt off. He moved like a man constantly looking over his shoulder, like someone who knew he was being hunted. The night I decided to make my move, I waited until 2 a.m. That's when the neighborhood was dead quiet, not even a stray dog wandering the streets. I slipped through the back alley, quiet as a whisper, and made my way to his house. There was no need for finesse. He didn't have any alarms or security systems. The door was a joke, barely held together by rusted hinges. I slipped inside and the smell hit me first. Damp, mold, and something else. Something sour. The kind of stench you can't shake. The kind that crawls into your lungs and sticks. I made my way through the darkened hallway, past piles of rotting food and broken furniture. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent cleaning in years. And then I heard it. A low, almost inaudible sound, like breathing. But it wasn't coming from upstairs where I assumed Kessler would be. No, it was coming from the basement. I should have turned back. Every instinct in me was screaming to leave. But the thing is, once you've come this far, there's no going back. I opened the door to the basement, and that's when the smell got worse. Way worse. It was the unmistakable stench of decay. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air was thick, like breathing through a wet rag. And then I saw it, a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling, illuminating a space that was far too clean compared to the rest of the house. In the center of the room was a table, and on that table, Jared Kessler was tied down, duct tape wrapped around his wrists and ankles, his mouth gagged with a dirty cloth. His eyes were wide, filled with terror, But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. No, what sent a chill down my spine was the fact that Kessler wasn't alone.
Around him, lining the walls, were bodies. Some fresh, some long decayed, all propped up in various states of grotesque mockery, posed like puppets, their eyes wide open, mouths sewn into twisted smiles. There were men, women, children. It didn't matter. They were all trophies in this sick fuck's collection. And Kessler was the latest addition. That's when I realized that this wasn't just a hit. This was a trap. I had been lured here like a fly into a web, and the real target, me. Before I could react, I felt something cold press against the back of my neck. A knife. Someone was behind me. I hadn't even heard them. "Looks like you took the bait," a voice whispered, low and raspy. I didn't move. My mind raced, calculating my next step, but the knife didn't move either. "You're not the first. You won't be the last." I heard a soft click, and suddenly I felt the sharp sting as the knife sliced into my shoulder. Pain shot through my body, but I didn't make a sound. I couldn't show weakness. I turned slowly, blood dripping down my arm, and there he was, Beale 4 Sec Widow. He wasn't what I expected. Tall, thin, with eyes that gleamed like a predator's in the dim light. His smile was wide, too wide, like he was savoring every second of this. He looked at me like I was the next corpse for his basement display. "This isn't your usual kind of job, is it?" he sneered, pressing the knife harder against my skin. "Kessler? He's just the bait. The real fun starts now."
I don't know what it was. Maybe the adrenaline, maybe just pure survival instinct. But something in me snapped. I grabbed his wrist and twisted it with all my strength. The knife clattered to the floor and I swung my fist into his face, feeling the satisfying crunch of bone. He staggered back, blood pouring from his nose, but the look in his eyes. He was laughing. I didn't wait. I grabbed the knife and drove it into his stomach, twisting it deep. The laughter stopped. He looked down at the wound, eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the floor in a heap. I stood over him, breathing hard, blood mixing with sweat, my mind reeling. But it wasn't over. I could feel it. There was more to this, something deeper, something far worse than I could have imagined. And as I looked at the bodies lining the basement walls, I knew I'd barely scratched the surface of whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. I had no idea what the hell I was dealing with. When I stabbed BL4 Sikh Widow, I thought that was it. I thought the nightmare would end, like it always does, clean up the mess, walk away, and disappear into the shadows. But this time was different. I could feel it the second I pulled that knife from his gut, the sound of his ragged breathing filling the room. He wasn't dead yet, but he was close. His blood pooled around him, dark and thick, spreading like a stain on the filthy concrete floor. But it wasn't his death that scared me. No, it was what happened next. I stood over his body, catching my breath, trying to figure out what the hell had just gone down. I glanced around the basement, the rows of rotting corpses still staring back at me with those haunting, sewn-up smiles. I didn't feel like I'd won. In fact, for the first time in years, I felt trapped. And then I heard it, a phone ringing. Not a normal ring, though. This was an old-school rotary-style ring, the kind you'd hear in a horror movie right before the killer makes their next move. I froze, my hand gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sound was coming from Beale 4 Sikh Widow. I knelt down, feeling through his pockets until I found a small, outdated flip phone. The screen flashed with an incoming call, an unknown number. I didn't want to answer it, but something deep inside told me I had no choice. I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was silence on the other end, just a low, static hum, and then a voice, soft, calm, but chilling in its detachment. "You're in deeper than you know," it said. BL4 Sikh Widow was just the beginning. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat felt dry, my mind racing. The voice continued, ignoring my silence. "We've been watching you for a long time, Every hit, every job, every single kill. You thought you were in control, but you were never the hunter. You've always been the prey. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to deny it, to say it was bullshit, but deep down, I knew they were right. Every hit I'd taken, every job I thought I'd done in secret, they had known. They had been watching me the entire time. But who the hell were they? Who is this? I finally managed to choke out, my voice trembling. The voice on the other end chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. You'll find out soon enough, but for now, we need you alive. We're not finished with you yet. And then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. What the fuck had I gotten myself into? I looked down at BL4 Sikh Widow, his body still twitching, blood seeping out of him. He was still alive, barely, his eyes fluttering open as he gasped for air. They're coming, he rasped, his voice weak and full of pain. You have no idea what you've done. I wanted answers, but there was no time. I heard footsteps upstairs, the floorboards creaking under the weight of several people. My instincts kicked in, fight or flight. But this wasn't like before. This wasn't some simple hit. This was a fucking ambush. I grabbed BL4 Sikh Widow by the collar, dragging him up and slamming him against the basement wall. His face twisted in pain, blood bubbling from his lips as he struggled to speak. "Who's coming?" I demanded, shaking him. "Who the fuck is after me?" But he just smiled, that twisted, maniacal grin, his teeth slick with blood. "You'll see," he whispered. "They're always watching." I heard the door to the basement creak open, and without thinking I dropped BL4 Sikh Widow and ducked behind one of the rotting corpses, pulling my knife close. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like whoever was up there wasn't in any hurry. They were toying with me, letting me stew in my own fear. And then, the voice from the phone spoke again, this time from the darkness at the top of the stairs. "You're not going to make it out of here alive, but don't worry, we'll make sure you get a proper introduction to the others." I couldn't see who was speaking, but I knew there were more than one. Shadows moved against the dim light from upstairs, figures slipping silently into the basement like phantoms. They weren't normal. I don't know how to explain it, but they moved in a way that wasn't natural, too smooth, too quiet, like they weren't even touching the ground. I held my breath, trying to keep calm, but my mind was racing. Who the hell were these people? Why were they after me? And more importantly, what did they want? BL4 Sikh Widow coughed weakly, his body slumped against the wall, barely hanging on to life. One of the figures stepped forward, kneeling beside him. They wore a black mask, featureless, just a blank face staring down at the dying man. "You've done well," the masked figure said, their voice a low, hollow echo. "But you've served your purpose." And with that, they slit his throat. It wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. BL4 Sikh Widow's body convulsed, blood spurting from the wound in thick, violent bursts. His eyes bulged in horror, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to scream, but all that came out was a gurgling, wet sound. He died slow, painfully slow.
The masked figure turned to face me, as if they knew exactly where I was hiding. "Your turn," they said, their voice sending ice down my spine. I wasn't about to sit there and wait for whatever fate they had planned for me. I bolted, sprinting for the stairs, but before I could reach the top, something slammed into my back. I fell forward, my face hitting the concrete hard enough to make my vision blur. Pain shot through my skull and I tasted blood in my mouth. I turned over, knife in hand, but the figures were already surrounding me. I slashed wildly, catching one of them across the arm, but they didn't flinch. They moved with precision, grabbing my wrists and pinning me down with ease. And then I felt it, something cold and sharp pressing against my neck. "Do you want to know why we chose you?" the masked figure asked, leaning in close. "Because you're like us. You think you're different, better, but deep down, you've always known the truth. You're a killer, just like we are. The only difference is, we enjoy it." I struggled against their grip, but it was useless. They had me. I was trapped. "Welcome to the real game," the figure whispered, their breath cold against my skin. "You're not a hunter anymore. You're the prey." I felt the blade cut into my skin, a shallow, teasing slice. It wasn't meant to kill me, not yet. No, they wanted me alive. They wanted me to suffer. And as the darkness closed in around me, I realized that whatever game they were playing, I was about to lose. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the cold. It seeped into my bones, making it hard to tell where my body ended and the freezing metal beneath me began. My head was pounding, my vision blurry, and the taste of blood still lingered in my mouth. I tried to move, but my wrists and ankles were strapped down, bound to some kind of operating table. My heart raced as panic set in. I wasn't dead, but I knew I was close. The room was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb overhead. The walls were steel, industrial, like some kind of underground bunker. The air reeked of rust and something far worse, something familiar. It was the smell of decay, of rot. As my vision cleared, I saw them. The figures from before, standing silently around me, their faces still hidden behind those featureless black masks. There were 4 of them, each holding tools, scalpels, needles, clamps, surgical tools. One of them stepped closer, holding a syringe filled with a murky brownish liquid. "You've been given a second chance," the masked figure said, their voice calm, almost clinical. "Consider yourself lucky. Not many people make it this far." "Second chance?" I croaked, my throat dry and raw. "What the fuck is this?" The figure chuckled softly. "This isn't just about killing anymore. This is about transformation. Evolution." I strained against the straps, my mind racing. "What are you talking about? Why am I here?" "Because," the figure said, stepping even closer, "you've proven yourself. You're no ordinary hitman. You've got potential, and we see potential in people like you." The other figures moved closer, setting their tools on a nearby table with surgical precision. I could hear the soft clinking of metal, the faint hum of machinery coming to life. I realized then that this wasn't just torture. They were preparing for something far worse. "You've hunted, you've killed, but you've always done it for money, for survival. We're going to strip that away," the figure continued, their voice eerily calm. "We're going to show you the truth." I struggled harder, but the restraints dug into my skin, biting into the flesh of my wrists and ankles. "The truth?" I spat, my voice shaking with rage and fear. "You're fucking insane." The figure ignored me, raising the syringe above my chest. "Insanity is just another form of enlightenment," they whispered. "This will help you see clearly." I thrashed, trying to break free, but it was useless. I felt the cold sting of the needle as it plunged into my arm, the liquid burning as it entered my bloodstream. Within seconds, the world around me began to blur, the edges of my vision warping and distorting. The room seemed to tilt, the figures swaying like shadows in a twisted, surreal dance. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage as the drug took hold, twisting my thoughts into a nightmarish spiral. I saw flashes of every person I'd ever killed, their faces contorted in agony, their eyes wide with terror. I heard their screams, felt their blood on my hands, warm and sticky. But then it changed. Their faces began to smile. One by one, the dead bodies from my past, the ones I'd taken out for money, for survival, stood before me, smiling. Their skin was pale, their eyes empty, but their lips curled into grotesque grins that stretched far too wide. It wasn't a normal smile. It was a mockery of life, like they were enjoying the sick game that was unfolding before my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to shake the hallucinations, but they kept coming, faster and faster. The bodies of those I'd killed appeared around me, their voices blending together in a chorus of whispers taunting me. "You thought you were in control. You thought you could hide." The words slithered through my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like poison. And then I saw her. Among the sea of smiling corpses stood the first person I had ever killed, the one I never talked about, the one I tried to forget. Her name was Emma. She wasn't a target. She wasn't some contract on the dark web. No, Emma was an accident. A woman I had met in a bar years ago, before all of this started. I had been drunk, angry, and stupid. We fought. Things got out of hand, and in a moment of blind rage, I'd hit her too hard. Her head had struck the edge of the bar, and that was it. She was gone.
I'd never told anyone about Emma, not a soul, but there she was, standing in front of me, her face pale, her eyes dark and hollow. And she was smiling too. "Why?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper that cut through the chaos in my mind. "Why did you do it?" "I didn't mean to," I muttered, shaking my head as the room spun around me. I didn't mean to." But the figures around me, Beale 4 Sec Widow, the masked ones, they weren't listening. They never were. They were watching, observing, waiting for me to break. The drug twisted my thoughts further, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. The bodies of my victims began to close in, their hands reaching out, grabbing at me, pulling me down. I screamed, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the hallucinations stopped. I was back in the room, strapped to the table, the masked figures still standing around me. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, my body slick with sweat. But something was different. The drug had done more than just fuck with my mind. I felt it in my veins, coursing through me like fire. My body was alive with a newfound energy, my senses sharper, my thoughts clearer. The fear that had gripped me moments before was gone, replaced by something darker, something more primal. The masked figure leaned in close, their voice low and satisfied. "Do you see now? Do you feel it? This is what you were always meant to be, a predator, not just a killer for hire, but something more, something unstoppable." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because they were right. The fear, the guilt, the hesitation, it was all gone. In its place was a cold, focused rage. I wasn't just killing for money anymore. I wasn't just surviving. I was evolving, becoming something else entirely. They thought they had turned me into their weapon, their tool for whatever sick game they were playing. But they didn't realize something crucial. I was done playing by their rules. With the new strength coursing through my body, I snapped the restraints like they were nothing. The sound echoed in the cold room, and the masked figures froze for a moment, taken off guard. They didn't expect me to break free. They thought they had control. But I wasn't prey anymore. The first figure didn't even have time to scream before I was on him, driving the scalpel I had grabbed from the table into his throat. Blood sprayed across the room as I tore through his neck, the gurgling sound of his last breath filling the silence. The others moved quickly, but not quickly enough. I was faster now, stronger. I lunged at the second figure, ripping off his mask, revealing a face twisted in shock and fear. I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I plunged the scalpel into his chest over and over, feeling the warm blood coat my hands. The third figure tried to run, but I grabbed him by the back of his head and slammed it into the steel wall. His skull cracked like an egg, his body crumpling to the floor in a heap. I stood there, breathing heavily, covered in blood, surrounded by the bodies of the people who had thought they could control me. They had unleashed something they couldn't contain, something far worse than they could ever imagine. And then I realized, this was it. This was who I really was. Not just a killer, but a predator, a monster. And I wasn't going to stop. Not now, not ever.